abandon these sites, and then the second question is who owns the sites themselves. So all of the wells sites and facility sites tied to oil and gas, where this work will be done, it's of course in Saskatchewan. The companies themselves, we've divided it up, the budget, if you will, amongst all of the companies based on their share of the inactive wells that are out there, and that we concluded that was the fairest way to do it. Our goal is to move quickly to get this work done, and a lot of these large companies have the capacity to put these packages together and hand us them as they're ready to go and we're ready to abandon. The companies themselves, though, who do this oil field service work, we have a fairly strong contingency here in all of our communities, from Estevan and Lloyd and Kindersley and Swift and everything in between. And there's two aspects of the work that goes on. The downhole work, where you have a rig and you're down, you're pouring cement and plugging the hole. So the plugging work is one set of skills, and you need special equipment for it and things like that. So that oil field service work, we have capacity to do that. The other thing is, once the well's plugged, you got to reclaim the site, revegetate it, get the crops back, all of that thing. That reclamation, that's more on the environmental management service side. And of course, we have a very strong capacity to do that here in Saskatchewan. One of the great things for us and opportunities is the SRC has been building that capacity through the Cleans project. And there are some capacity, especially from who's been doing work in the north, that could be transferable to this program. And the SRC is examining that, as well as SAS build. So we are worried that we want to maximize Saskatchewan. So the first tranche, Blair mentions $100 million. It's really, we want to make sure we don't overwhelm our capacity to move. And so although this year's budget is $150, this is Saskatchewan, so winter comes, so our windows get kind of tight on our work. So we see the lion's share of the work will be in the forward year. So the 150 we have, we think the industry, our oil field service sector, can sustain that. We'll see. We're pretty confident, though. Just we know that these services are done here, and they're transferable. If you're drilling a well, you can also transfer your skill sets into abandoning wells. So.
No, I'm just trying to, because that's the primary concern that we have, that, we kind of look at Saskatchewan people, workers and companies first. It's not being selfish, it's the reality. The reality is, I think every government across the country is doing what we aspire to do here. And I think it's probably wise to deal with the oil and gas companies as opposed to, trying to maneuver around things like the New West Partnership as an example. By and large, how has the companies, have they been really cooperative? There's been no issues, no problem with their engagement to the whole notion of Saskatchewan First, because they do have bricks and mortars here, but there's no particular company that's problematic on that front.
We haven't encountered such. And in terms of the New West Partnership, I mean, obviously, we're working to implement policy within frameworks of that, but like other provinces, we really want to put priority on Saskatchewan workers. And what I referenced earlier about the working with Sask Builds, in a way, through this COVID period and through this announcement around abandonment and working with Sask Builds, we've gained perhaps some unique insights into how best to do that and how best to prioritize Saskatchewan companies and Saskatchewan workers, service companies, and certainly on my end, I have not encountered any resistance to anything but that would be our priority, and everyone seems good with that.
How thorough are we going to be examining the Saskatchewan First concept or desired achievement, so to speak? Are we going to the extent of actually seeing who's employed and where their home addresses are? Are we going down to that level, or is it just basically a lot of trust and faith between our government and industry? Like, how concise and precise are the qualifications of what we're trying to do here?
Well, and again, I'll let officials, add anything they feel is necessary. I think the most important thing through this process, Mr. Belanger, has been to keep our ear close to the ground. And again, I've done a lot of roundtables with, private members across the province, with Ms. Young, Mr. Steele, throughout this period. And one of the things that sticks in my mind, I remember from the roundtable with Ms. Young and with stakeholders and service companies around the Lloydminster area, and this was before we put out the abandonment plan and rolled it out, was how problematic things are right now. What a difficult time it's been for service companies and for people, and how much they wanted this program to work. And so I think the most important thing has been, as I say, to keep my ear to the ground. We all have had to make sure that we keep getting the immediate feedback from companies, stakeholders on the ground about what they're hearing, what they're not hearing, and what we could do better. And so far, I think, and I'm biased, yes, but I'm also, I think it's fair to say that I think it's a very good program, that it's gone over well, that we've had very good response in terms of the Saskatchewan focus, that it's getting better reviews than perhaps programs in some other provinces, which I'm proud of. And I think it was important to take the time that we did, albeit it felt, as I say, dizzying speed enough at times, but that we took the time to also evaluate what was happening and what had happened in other provinces in terms of what worked and maybe what could work better. And so I think that we've had, as I say, very good feedback, because we've asked and continue to ask so directly about what people are seeing and experiencing on the ground. Doug, I don't know if you have anything.
In terms of how we're pre-qualifying, Assistant Deputy Minister Wager mentioned that we're going right now through a request for service qualifications, and that's the process. We'll be determining their eligibility for funding under this program based on Saskatchewan employment, the location of operation, and those things. So that intake process is what we're doing now. Once the company pre-qualifies, they don't have to keep redoing that. We've got lots of wells to abandon, so we're trying to keep it as lean as we can, but we do have a pre-qualification process to make sure that the questions that relate to their place of operation. We inevitably, we're going to have to look carefully at the company just to make sure that they could have hundreds of employees here, and those are the folks getting the money kind of thing, and their headquarters could be out of province. But we're very careful to make sure that all of the tests that SaskBuild uses in their Priority Saskatchewan program we're following in terms of pre-qualification.
Yeah, so, and the whole premise of why we're doing this, because from the income tax perspective, the tax is collected where you live, not necessarily where you work, right? And that's the principle of how we maximize benefit of Saskatchewan, because we've had, as you probably are aware, a lot brighter than I am, but over the years, many times, even through the agreement on interprovincial trade, there are some barriers that, some provinces that are supposedly free enterprise, they're more problematic to Saskatchewan than others that are not as viewed as free enterprise. So it's just a lot of times jurisdictions and provinces will protect their own, and they'll go to great lengths. So we just can't be a willing partner and say, yeah, you do what you want. I think from our perspectives, we got to protect Saskatchewan workers' interests. And that's why we're taking a special time to look at this and encourage Madam Minister and the officials to make sure that we protect Saskatchewan people's jobs. I want to just maybe shift then, because obviously this is a really important program, and the federal government is very astute in providing the necessary funding. I think our role is to make sure we maximize benefits to the Saskatchewan people, and that in all contexts help all of our efforts to try and get the economy going. Now, under the Oil Infrastructure and Investment Program, support for new and expanded pipelines, could you explain the history of this program and who was consulted? What was the anticipated fiscal impact of this policy, the economic impact, and any projects that you want to share in particular? And of course, the last one, how has COVID-19 impacted this particular initiative?
Mr. Belanger, just to be totally clear, you're talking about the oil infrastructure investment program, right? So, okay. Just wanted to make sure I was here listening and heard the correct program. So in terms of how it came about, I mean, obviously, despite the OPEC plus price war and the COVID period and all the challenges that has put on the sector throughout this time, prior to March, we wanted to make sure that we left no stone unturned when it came to, export options for oil out of Saskatchewan. And again, as you know, that landscape has become more challenging in recent years. In terms of federal cancellations of Energy East and Northern Gateway and so on. And so obviously we're hopeful. I mean, Enbridge Line 3 replacement is positive. Keystone XL, if it goes ahead and all remains, goes according to plan, is positive, as is TMX. But I think certainly the impetus behind it was to look at viable, also privately solid in terms of companies and so on, and proposals that were positive, that we could look at to do everything we can to help get the product to Tidewater, which has remained certainly a challenge over recent years. So this program is a transferable free hold royalty credit program, and it's aimed to do just that, just to get product to market and to Tidewater. It helps, we felt, to fulfill the commitment set out in our growth plan, to increase oil production and increase exports by 50% by 2030, and to support companies, as I say, that have valid, solid proposals to help ensure that we have that market access and grow the natural resource economy and narrow the oil differential, which is so important to oil producers here in the province. So again, it's an incentive that specifically looks at export possibilities out of the province and helps to foster those where they may be possible.
With the whole notion around the oil infrastructure investment program, as we've said in the past, we've had numerous discussions in the Assembly. We've had numerous positions that we've shared and agreed that are important to share with the public. The oil and gas development and the huge task that they now face, this particular industry, and the crash of the world oil prices, like, it's just almost a perfect storm. Like, we have COVID-19, then you have the economic realities of many countries that, Canada notwithstanding their challenges, and of course you turn around and you deal with COVID and the oil price drop. It's an amazing challenge for this particular industry. And we try as best we can to see, despite our limited knowledge of the industry, just by reaching out to the industry leaders and attending functions and showing support. Those are, I think, what are really important that the opposition members do along with the government. And of course, the government is able to do things that I think, in hindsight, the opposition party would do as well, because it's important to get our economy going. And oil and gas is a big part and will continue being a big part of our economy. I've maintained that position from day one. So as you look at ways and means of getting our product to Tidewater, and I've been a strong critic in the Assembly of the failures of governments in general in getting pipelines and getting things moving in the right direction. Despite having the proper political alliance, the job wasn't done. But that being said, and I'll point out that some of the things that are problematic I see for oil and gas is, we've had a couple of derailments, and, those derailments really hurt the industry as well, because there's over-reliance on hauling by train. And we got to be very careful here, because there was no critique of the safety measures necessary to avoid the derailment. And I don't think the Premier of Saskatchewan was critical of the company to make sure that certain measures were undertaken to get the people of Saskatchewan to have confidence in the rail transportation option. And we have to address that particular gap as well, because if we're committed to getting our product, as we say, to Tidewater, then we have to take principled positions. And when we have train derailments, and the public are very fickle when they see train derailments and train cars exploding and fires, and I think it happened near, was it Guernsey a couple times? That we simply can't sit and say, well, we hope the company has a better plan. There's got to be some strong leadership on that front. So from the perspective of oil infrastructure and the investment program and the genuine agreement between both parties that the oil and gas sector are really important to our economy, and I'm not going to go down our historical role that we played in our waning years of government from 2004 to 2007, because I've gone through those numerous times. But do you see the whole notion of the train derailment as an issue that has to be addressed sooner than later?
Well, on the train derailment, I mean, I think everyone can agree that that was, of course, extremely regrettable, and that it happened twice in the space of a matter of, if not weeks, months. I mean, that was, I think the important thing, though, in that case was to make sure that, as a federally regulated line, and that the company, do its due diligence and look at what happened there. And I think that's still occurring to a certain extent. I know I read just in the last 10 days or so, they've made sort of new determinations on what they could perhaps have done differently, what they did in terms of, investigating that line and making sure that things were in order prior to those very regrettable occurrences. So I think we had to certainly wait to see how that played out, as the federal regulator and the company in question did their work. Certainly we've been consistent as a province to point out that part of the importance, of course, of pipelines is to mitigate that high traffic on the rails, and that when you're competing with agricultural products, minerals, mining products, and everything else, it would be very helpful to get some of that oil off the tracks and off the rails and into pipelines. So again, I mean, as that gets resolved, I'm sure we'll be, commenting and so on further. I think I will say too. In terms of the incentives, which you asked about, and the one in particular, I will just say that I think it's important also to keep in mind that these incentives, are really about government dollars following, not leading. And I think that that's one thing that's very important to emphasize about all the incentives that you'll have read about, and that are, include the one you mentioned, that the money isn't disseminated until the projects are operational. And that's very important. And so, as I say, several of them are structured around transferable royalty credits, but the province recoups that money through royalties and taxes over the life of these projects. And I think that's important to reference as well. And our oil and gas investment incentive, which I referenced also in my opening remarks, is one that is continuing, has already been applied to the Gibson refinery in Moose Jaw, which will see production throughput increase, but GHGs decrease. It will support the local economy and local employment. So again, already quite a lot of success in regard to the incentives that we have announced, and we hope that this one will also encourage viable projects.
I think I've got a few minutes left, so I'll just take the time, first of all, to thank the officials. And I got one more question left with the minister, and it's a very specific question. But I want to point out that as we look at how we can support the oil and gas sector, there is a myriad of options that we can look at. And my message to the government, and in particular the Premier, is that you've got to take the steps in a principled, consistent manner to address the threats to the oil and gas sector. You can't simply say, well, we're not going to push for better inspections on the rail companies, because it affects and impacts public opinion on oil and gas when we have a derailment. He's got to be consistent, he's got to be thoughtful, and he's got to be thorough. And we see gaps of that sort because I think, quite frankly, that a lot of times this politics interferes with the practicality of supporting this business. And that's why it's important for me to express that concern. And obviously, we're going to be putting a lot more time in that particular aspect of how we can support the oil and gas better as it comes to the option of transport by rail. I just want to finish off because we only have a few more minutes left. But under the COVID-19 challenges, as many companies have backed off and they've really not gone forward with some of their investment or their schedule for drilling and exploration and so on and so forth, how are you going to deal with companies or individuals that have a lapsed mineral claim? Are you going to be a bit more patient with them, a bit more understanding, because COVID-19 did put a lot of these companies that have had mineral claims, they've basically shut down operations. And if I had and I don't, but in theory, if I had a mineral claim and it expired and I wanted to re-engage in that particular mineral claim, the last 6 months would probably prevent me from doing so, especially in light of COVID. Is there special considerations to reinstate some of the lapsed mineral claims for companies that have held them or individuals?
Well, that's what I was referencing earlier, and Corey or Doug, if you want to just confirm all of that and add anything I've missed, but I know we referenced that earlier about just some of that's being part of the relief measures for exploration companies in particular.
Yes, just in terms of the specifics, regulations gone through that's extended all the mineral claims for a period of time. I'll say 12 months, but it depends on how your term is, minimum. And also we've waived the requirement if you haven't been able to do work, sometimes you had to give a deposit to hold the claim, and we've waived that requirement for a deposit. So we worked with the Saskatchewan Mining Association carefully to make sure we had a right size for the challenges. I think, as you're well aware, you can't go out on the ground doing exploration work. So that's one challenge, but the other challenge, of course, is the investment markets as well. They need to raise money to do this work, and it'll be some time for that to stabilize here. So we're pretty confident we have the right mix of regulatory solutions, but we're not through this. And so we continue to engage with the Mining Association, the minister, regularly, and we're going to have to keep an eye on the circumstance out there.
Thank you very much, and just would ask the officials to provide me with a name and contact number of the individual that would be leading the mineral extension, so to speak, permit. If you can give that to me after the committee, that would be great. That's all I have, Madam Minister, from our perspective, because we have a bill to pass as well, I understand.
Is there any more questions from any other members? Yeah. Doug, if you have one.
So?
She'll do it.
Oh, well. Yeah, no touch. I was just wondering how much gold production was there over last year? Do we have any idea on the production that was, or what was produced over last year?
Oh, yeah, Corey.
Corey Hughes for the record. So I don't have the number in front of me. It was over 100,000 ounces of gold, which was record production for the, I believe, the second or third consecutive year. And we were forecasting another record year as SSR continues to expand their plans and their production at that facility and run it very, very efficiently. But as all northern operations experience, they are currently shut down. They're working hard to reestablish, so we're not sure what the production level will be this year. But
well, basically it was covered as I had to see here we discussed, but just I guess the only other one that possibly that wasn't touched on is how's the government growing lithium production in Saskatchewan? And
Those are tough questions. We'll just wait. Rocher, my opposition, picture.
I will just say, Madam Chair, on the gold, I have the exact number as well, which is that it was a 17% increase in 2019 and 112,327 ounces.
The question on lithium. Lithium's still in a very early stage, and a lot of the work the ministry has done on the lithium side has centered on the work of our Saskatchewan Geologic Survey. Has been doing extensive work over the years, quantifying the opportunities in the produced water space for the oil and gas industry. There is obviously some emerging opportunities down the southwest, and right now I am at a loss to tell you the status of those particular ones, and I'm going to turn to my colleague Corey to see if he's got that right hand on lithium. Do we have? To that, you, Mr. Steele, on that point, and we'll just give you an update on the status of those projects.
No further questions. Madam Minister, if you have any comments you would like to wrap up on this portion before we move on.
Sure. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess I would just say that to Mr. Boulanger's points about the importance of remaining consistent when it comes to energy policy and positions on pipelines and the sector and so on, I would submit that we have been very consistent in regard to certainly on the importance, as I referenced earlier, of pipelines overstretching the rail system. And I think in terms of looking back over this period of COVID and the challenges we've faced in the last few months, it does make for an interesting time capsule. I mean, what we were doing before all this hit, because they're the things that we will be continuing to do. And I mean, only a few months ago, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, for example, recently said that increases in capital investment in the upstream sector is down to Saskatchewan. For fostering fairness and competitiveness. Alberta as well, but Saskatchewan absolutely. And we're doing that with water flood. We're doing that with our R&D and targeted infrastructure incentives, some of which we've referenced today, and we will continue to do that. We're doing that with the Pipeline Action Committee, which is looking at those potential viable pipeline projects that I referenced, and our export incentive. Often forgotten in some of this too is we didn't curtail production. That seems like an eternity ago, but when Alberta did. And I know Grant Fagerheim of Whitecap Resources said at the time, quote, as soon as we heard this curtailment was taking place, we shifted our capital to Saskatchewan from Alberta. And, you know, we have to remember in this province, we have extremely stable regulation, stable royalties, incentives around horizontal drilling and enhanced oil recovery. And all of that has helped attract $4 billion in private investment into our oil industry last year alone. And remember the Scotiabank playbook. We have the #1 oil play in North America. We fought Bill C-69, we fought Bill C-48. This has been an unprecedented time, and it was unprecedented before we went into this 3 months ago. But I think it's important too that we remember the consistency we have shown as a government and as a ministry when it comes to fighting for our sectors. across energy and resources. So with that, I'll certainly thank you, Madam Chair, committee members, Mr. Belanger for his engaged questions, and certainly would echo Mr. Belanger's comments about the dedication and efforts across government, but also across the sectors through this time. They have been incredibly resilient, and our all-important Saskatchewan workers have also been, and we're so, so proud of them. So with that, I'll thank the committee.
Thank
And
you,
my minister.
Thank you, Minister Eyre, and your officials. Mr. Belanger, do you have any further questions on this? If not, then we can move on to the next bill.
Yeah, thank you, and I forgot to thank the officials as well. And I still do want that name for the lapsed mineral claim, because I got about 2 or 3 folks that ask me about what happens there. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll now move on to, unless you have any new officials that you have to change out, Minister? No, you're good? Okay. We'll move on to the consideration of Bill 181, the Mineral Taxation Modernization Amendment Act 2019, Clause 1, short title. So Minister Eyre, on that bill, if you would like to begin with some opening remarks.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Madam Chair, and good afternoon again to members of the committee. I would like to introduce the 2 Energy and Resources officials with me here today. Well, more than 2. That was just the scripted 2. Same officials who were here before, Madam Chair. And last fall, the Ministry of Energy and Resources introduced the Mineral Taxation Modernization Amendment Act 2019. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Pause for a moment. Mr. Belanger, are you not staying to finish off this bill, or are we switching out members? That's all right. If we needed to take a recess to switch out members, I sort of need to know that. You're okay? All right, sorry, Madam Minister, you may begin again if you'd like on this bill.
No, that's fine. I'll just carry on to say that this act levies the mineral rights tax on roughly 40,000 freehold mineral titles in Saskatchewan and generated $9.4 million in revenue last year. The current act has been in effect in its present form for almost 40 years. The proposed amendments to the Act will modernize the administration of the tax by moving the mineral rights tax rate, exemptions, and other administrative matters from the current Act to the regulations. The tax rate, together with the existing exemption requirements, will not change as a result of these amendments. The proposed changes will bring Saskatchewan's administration of the mineral tax in line with other jurisdictions such as Ontario and Alberta. It also aligns with our administration of production taxes levied under the Act for potash, coal, and sodium chloride. The amendments will modernize the Act in several important ways. It will update the legal language and drafting to modern standards, enable non-taxed individuals to voluntarily transfer their mineral titles to the Crown, authorize the use of new electronic mineral rights tax administration, which will streamline assessment and enhance service delivery. Last summer, Madam Chair, the Ministry of Energy and Resources consulted stakeholders regarding the proposed legislation. A discussion paper was posted to Saskatchewan.ca along with an online system for submitting comments. The ministry also contacted 321 mineral owners directly to notify them of the review. Contacts included farming and ranching businesses, resource extraction companies and associations, non-resource extraction businesses, holding and royalty companies, and nonprofits, churches, universities, and municipalities. Respondents were supportive of measures that streamline the procedures for administering the tax. Overall, these amendments will promote a more balanced mineral rights tax regime with a more effective, more reliable, and less costly administrative system. And with that, thank you, Madam Chair, and we can go to questions from committee.
Thank you, Minister. And now I'll open the floor to members for any questions on Bill 181. If there are no questions from any members, seeing none, we will proceed to vote off the clauses. Okay, Thank you. All right, Clause 1, short title, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 2, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 3, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 4, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 5, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 6, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 7, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 8, is that agreed? Carried. Clause 9, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 10, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 11, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 12, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 13, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 14, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 15, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Clause 16, coming into force, is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts as follows: the Mineral Taxation Modernization Amendment Act, 2019. I would now ask a member to move that we report Bill number 181, the Mineral Taxation Modernization Amendment Act, 2019, without amendment. Mr. Steele so moves. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Carried. Minister, any further closing remarks that you may have this evening?
No, simply to thank committee members, Mr. Belanger and you, Madam Chair, and Hansard, of course, for being here today, and thank you.
Minister, and thank you, Mr. Belanger. This committee will now stand recessed until 6 p.m. this evening.